Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Maté. Joining me is David West, retired NBA player, spent 15 years in the league, two-time NBA All-Star, two-time NBA champion with the Golden State Warriors. Now the chief operating officer of the Professional Collegiate League, which is launching to provide an alternative to the NCAA. David West, welcome to Pushback.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Wanted to get your thoughts on what's happening in the NBA right now, the walkout by players over the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. Looks like, as we are speaking, play is resuming, but this was a pretty historic action. I'm wondering your thoughts on what has gone down in just these last few days.
Yeah, I think it was a great move by the guys. It wasn't planned. I think it was more of an emotional thing. A few of them had been, some guys have been really shaken up by the video. I couldn't tell you one way or another because I stopped watching these videos years ago. But players were just at a point where, again, I think you see it. These guys have an ethical line and a moral line that even the people that employ them don't. At least haven't been public about it. And so, I know there was a couple guys that were fed up and just feeling like, we went through all of this and things are still, these police are still doing what they're doing. And so it kind of happened organically. And once one team shut down, the other team shut down, and it spread across the sports world, for a day or two. Obviously, it's a symbol, but it's also something that I think is going to resonate with people, and it felt like a warning. That's what it came across to me like. It was a warning to these major sports leagues. It's a warning to the political class. That people are continuing to show that they are fed up with the conditions that exist in this country. And it just so happens that, for Black people, police violence and, being the victims of, over policing, in my opinion, and trigger happy police officers, it's just getting to a point where you're just, you have a whole community of people that are just fed up with the constant trauma. And, the players are not exempt from that community. They feel it like everyone else feels it. And they're, they're compelled to do things like they did the other night. I'm proud of the guys in a general sense, because, again, the spirit that's amongst them now, it wasn't in the NBA while I was in there. So I'm glad that these players are pushing things forward, are making these sort of statements and symbolic gestures that, I think are starting to wake folks up. I do know that the NBA has heard the guys. I know that they were surprised about what the players were doing. And, I know that they weren't expecting guys, to take that step. But I'm glad that, the players did, because, again, it continues to highlight the imbalance, right, and the uneasiness that exists in this society.
Let me ask you about how you dealt with issues like this when you were playing. You mentioned that when you were in the league, there was not the political consciousness amongst the association that there is now. How did you deal with that yourself as you evolved politically and developed your own views while still balancing your responsibilities as a player and just dealing with the reality of the league that you're in?
Yeah, I always just try to maintain my inner peace. There were, issues, arising all the time while I was in the league, but it was always, I guess, addressed as in terms of a singular voice. When I first came in the early 2000s, guys in the league ultimately were still operating under the myth that if you say things about social issues, if you're politically astute in any way, that it'll hurt your chances of having a career. And it'll hurt your chances of getting endorsements and all these other things. But I was somebody that never, bought into that. So I always felt free to speak my mind and state my positions on different things. And then, The other thing is, and I think this is starting to shift a little bit, is when I was in the NBA and I had a couple experiences with, I guess you would say, Black community leaders. But my voice, I was told literally, like, you're not a big enough star, you're not a big enough name to really, it'd be like, well, okay, it's cool that you're saying whatever you're saying, but what about this guy and that guy? And so, for me, I remember that experience. I kind of just took a step back, realized that this was more about, me making sure that I was true to my own soul and my own consciousness, and didn't really worry about whether or not what I said, would get the attention that, if somebody else said it. So that's how I used to deal with it. I would just try to, make, when there were opportunities for me to speak and use my platform to bring attention to issues, I would. When we had the issue with Donald Sterling, I was one of the first guys to speak out and call him, what he was, and, work to put pressure on the NBA to get him removed. And, we've dealt with, again, at no point in my career did I think that the country was at such a moment that we're in now, and really in the last couple years, as we've seen, sort of this reinvigoration of, sort of white supremacist ideology, and the way that, again, the behavior of public servants and the way that they're interacting with a specific part of of society, mainly Black communities, continues to devolve and not evolve in a way that is going to be beneficial for everyone moving forward. So, again, you just got to be true to yourself, be true to who you are. I think that, the other piece is, like, when I was in the NBA, when I started, social media wasn't a thing. And even while I was in the NBA, most guys were resistant to it. And then it was the younger, generation of guys that really came in and embraced it and used it, in turn as a means to access people, but also access information. So guys have access to more information. They have the ability to go out or literally just sit at their phone and read what they want, figure out things on their own. And I think that's changed the way that, players act in terms of their group dynamic that wasn't existent when I was in there.
Did the experiences of Craig Hodges or Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, Chris Jackson, have any experience on you? Craig Hodges, who played, for people who don't know, who played on that first Bulls championship team, he spoke out against a lack of Black ownership in the league and other issues. He wore a dashiki to a White House visit with the first President Bush. He was then basically kicked out of the league after that.
Yeah.
Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, who refused to stand for the U.S. national anthem, was suspended for a few games and was reviled in the media. Did either of those guys have an impact on you growing up?
You know what? They didn't, and I'll tell you why. We didn't. I lived in New Jersey, and we didn't have cable. I mean, I'll just be honest. We didn't have cable, so I didn't see NBA. I saw NBA basketball once a week, and that was on Saturdays, whenever NBC had a game. And the mainstream media didn't cover that. So I actually learned about the whole Craig Hodges thing. I didn't learn about that until it was over with, right? I think, and a lot of us were like that, because even when we got to the NBA, when I got to the NBA, there were still parts of what he did that I wasn't aware of. And I think, again, those instances now would be covered entirely differently, because you could go to your phone, you could sort of see what's going on, you could hear a million different perspectives about what was going on. And I think back then, we didn't hear about it. Same thing with Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. It was covered in a way that didn't allow for us to really dig into. And so most guys won't admit this, but even with Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, you didn't know about that or really learn about the particulars of what that was about until you get into the NBA. And then people start, guys are talking about, you remember this, remember that. And that's where that came, from me. So I didn't really get influenced by either one of those guys, because I learned about what they actually did much later. and I was already sort of fixed in my ways. So I've never, I don't think there's a political sports figure that I've admired or had to look to for guidance. I mean, other than sort of the ideological understanding that Ali had in terms of the way he looked at the world, the way he viewed black people, and the way that he spoke about imperialism. I mean, that is the um, part where I would say I am influenced by sort of his ideological understanding of the larger picture of the globe. And I don't know if players back again in the early 2000s, we didn't have social media, and it was something that we frowned upon. So the information, like I said, the information wasn't there. And if you're an athlete and you're somebody that, again, you're playing this game where you're bouncing between your professional life and then the commitment that you have to your own conscience. I know I found myself sometimes feeling alone, feeling very lonely. I went through a period where I was reaching out to various guys. I didn't think to reach out to, Craig Hodges or Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, but I was just trying to reach out to different people that I thought could help sort of steady my focus and help me balance and figure out how to make this thing work.
You mentioned earlier Donald Sterling, the former owner of the LA Clippers, who was kicked out after he was recorded making some racist comments. Has there ever been talk amongst the players that you've heard of the players just forming their own league and owning the league themselves?
I think, we've had, guys have had those conversations. You have those ideas float. This generation of players, I would say, are the guys that, if it was a possibility, they are a step closer to it than the group of players that I was a part of. Right? The guys who are no longer in the NBA versus the guys who are in the NBA currently. I think these guys are a lot more business savvy, and they potentially have the mindset to do something like that. Obviously, it's a large undertaking, but it comes with the concept, right, that you should own your own talent and you should own and control your talent. And there should be sort of this cohesion between those at the executive level and the players. There should be representation, both ways, particularly when you have a league that's predominantly black. So, I think that conversation has come up. But like I said, this generation, if there was ever a generation or era of athletes that would push that, these are the guys that would do it.
And speaking of owning your own talent and being paid for it, let's talk about the NCAA. You are part of this league, the Professional Collegiate League, launching as an alternative to the NCAA. For people who have not heard of it yet, can you explain the concept behind it?
Yeah. The PCL is the Professional Collegiate League. We are working to create a model that compensates athletes as a first step to their collegiate careers. We believe that college basketball players and college athletes in general generate a market, generate billions of dollars, and they're the only people that, in effect, aren't monetarily compensated from the money that they help generate. Everyone else is compensated. Everyone else is able to build their career. Everyone else is able to, use the money that these players from their labor generate to support their families, and the players literally can't do the same. So we've carved out a model that we think is the model of collegiate sports of the future, where athletes, again, will be compensated. There will be rev shares with the athletes. They will have an opportunity to professionalize themselves immediately after high school, even if they're not necessarily an NBA talent and ready to just jump into the league right away. Our program is a 5-year program. We separate education and athletics. So we put our athletic competitions and things like that in the summer so that our players and the guys, the athletes in our system can enjoy being collegiate athletes to a degree that they're developing themselves as professionals. They have the ability to go to 4-year universities, 2-year universities, technical colleges, community colleges, trade schools, or get into, online curriculums, which, most people are in right now anyway. So that's, what we're doing in a nutshell. We believe in compensation for collegiate athletes who help, generate billions and billions of dollars for other people.
the concept of your league even has the force of what I think is one of the most extraordinary court rulings I've ever read, where there was a judge recently who wrote that the NCAA acts as, quote, a cartel of buyers acting in concert to artificially depress the price that sellers could otherwise receive for their services, unquote. And their judge is talking there, the sellers being the players. It's like the only, I can't think of any other case in this country where there's such a conspiracy to basically deny people
Right.
of their market value. It is a cartel. I mean, like, cartel is a great word for it. What kind of response have you gotten from the young players that you've spoken to so far?
Yeah, we've got guys are definitely interested. I think you saw a pattern of players making decisions to go overseas and play as opposed to going into the collegiate system as it stands. We've had conversations with all levels of players, and we're getting interest because we know that players now are looking for different options, right? The players are the ones that have the fewest amount of choices in this space. Coaches, can hop around from job to job. Coaches can work on career elevation in these stages, and literally the athlete just has to be an athlete. Has to be, players can't make this college experience beneficial for them outside of what, the NCAA and these institutions are willing to provide at a minimum. They fight tooth and nail to deny players access to more benefits. And, guys are starting to wake up. A few weeks ago, we saw that the Pac-12 players were making statements. I know there were some Big Ten players making statements. Most collegiate football programs have postponed their seasons at least until January. A lot of programs have canceled all, fall sports and have started looking toward 2021. But, it is one of the only systems that is explicitly built around exploitation. And, the system itself operates in a way that it masks its true intent, and people get caught up in, school nostalgia, and they get caught up in sport, in the idea of competition. They get caught up in, the feelings that, these tournaments bring, and these different highlight points during the year where this school is rivalry games and things like that. And that is enough to outweigh the fact that the system is exploiting these guys. It's literally exploiting these players. And so, again, we're against exploitation at all levels, but in terms of the impact that we feel we can have in the sports space, we felt like this was a challenge that we should take up and fight. And we should make sure that people understand that there is another way, right? That we can create another option. We can create other options for these guys to meet their needs as athletes. And, to be honest with you, most guys who go to school aren't necessarily going to school for school, right? Your academic schedule is literally created around how often you can be available for your sport. So oftentimes you're in school and you're not studying what you want to study. So, I went to Xavier, and I'm now back in school getting my master's in history because history is what I really wanted to study. But I remember the timing. We had practice from 3 to 6 in the afternoons, and some of the history courses were in the afternoon, so I couldn't go that way. And it's a very, very interesting way. I think that college athletes have to make decisions about their lives, about their futures, based on, again, this situation that is at its core an exploitive situation where these universities and these institutions, extract more from the talent than they, actually give the talent in terms of what the university is taking from them. They can use their name, image, and likeness for the duration that they're in the school. But then also as these guys leave the universities, these universities are still profiting off of these players. And, every single year as guys come in, again, you see career opportunities for coaches, career opportunities for athletic directors, and all the different folks throughout the system. And the only guys that are sort of stuck in one place with very few options, very limited choices, and are penalized when they make decisions that, again, if a guy decides to transfer, he gets penalized. If a guy, again, doesn't meet a certain standard in courses that you're not necessarily giving him the best access to information and resources to be the best he can be. That's why, again, we joke about it in the sports world, but the idea of guys taking basket weaving and cookie cutting and stuff like that is a reality because they have to be available to prep and play their sport. So again, you underserve these athletes at the same, and on the other hand, you're literally exploiting them and using them, as long as they're in your grasp and in your control, so that what they produce profits and benefits everyone but themselves individually and the communities that they come from ultimately.
What aspect of history are you focusing on in grad school?
African American history. I haven't decided what era. But I want to, I've done a lot of studying on my own and research on my own over the last, 20 years or so. And I want to, really challenge myself and see what I've got. I mean, see if I can validate what I've learned on my own. So I'm going for a master's in African studies, African history, or African diaspora studies. One of those focuses.
Recently, there's been a lot of attempts to silence NBA players by bringing up China. There was this controversy a few months ago when you had a executive at the Houston Rockets tweeting something out in support of the Hong Kong separatist movement. Then you had a bunch of right-wing lawmakers trying to basically lecture NBA players for not speaking out about Hong Kong while the NBA was playing in China. You got involved in that. You spoke to a lot of players from what I've read. What did you tell them, and what are your thoughts on that whole situation?
Well, I first told the players, point blank, right? It was like this weapons of mass destruction type hysteria that these folks were trying to build upon. And the hardest thing, I guess, about being in the NBA is that, and I experienced this, right? People want to control what you have access to because they know the enormous platform that players have. And even when you're not like a star player, superstar player, whatever, you still have a significant platform because you have access to these superstar players, right? You have access to the other guys who then could make, a big social statement or make some kind of impact. And so that environment to sort of shelter guys is in place. And again, people are very careful about what they, quote unquote, try to put in front of NBA players or put on professional athletes' plates. And when this Hong Kong thing came up, because it's a historical point, right? It's not a simple contemporary issue. This is a historical point that is deeply steeped in colonization. It's deeply steeped in imposition and cultural imposition, where you're stepping on and trying to, like you said, create this separatist movement and disconnect a place from its ancient origin, right? So Hong Kong has always been a part of China. Hong Kong was the colonial outpost of the West during the colonial period of China. And a lot of guys didn't know that. So I made sure that the players that I spoke to knew that, and knew that what they were trying to be roped into was not a good look. And they were responsive. And I think because a lot of guys have been to China themselves. They have actually been in China, have played over there, have either, done tours over there, marketing events over there. They understand the society firsthand. And they understand the way that people are organized, and they're organized in a different way socially than we are. But it doesn't mean that it's bad. Doesn't mean that it's it's worth less just because it's different. And the irony of it all is, Black people are the ones that have had to, we've had this reality for some time, right? We understand, imperial adventurism to the degree that, most of us understand the impact that, imperialism has had on our culture, speaking of people who have descended from Africa, and then generally what's happened in the conditions of African Americans in American society. So when you start talking about human rights, it is not hard for guys to realize, wait a minute, you're talking out both sides of your mouth, because the human rights that you're claiming you're fighting for and standing for in Hong Kong, you don't support the marginalized folks of this society who are fighting for their human rights and their rights to survive, right? So they don't even realize the contradictions, I think, or maybe they do, and they just don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? But the contradictions that exist in trying to get a group of black players to speak out against a government or a system that isn't affecting them personally, right? So this is the same argument that Ali made, right, about Vietnam. Like, they haven't done anything to me. They haven't called me nigger, and you want me to go over there and kill them, right? So it's that understanding that I think players got quite early. And, despite the ridiculous media circles and circus that they tried to put, the guys didn't go for it, and they're not going to go for it. The NBA as a corporate entity has to play the game, but the players, don't have to go along with the game. And again, you're talking about the largest basketball market in the world in China. Basketball is their national sport, and you've got more kids playing basketball in China than we almost have citizens in this country. So for the players and even for the NBA, it's a business proposition that you're asking, particularly some of these rogue senators and whoever else they are asking the NBA to really sacrifice their business and ask the players to sacrifice their business for a political agenda, which I don't think the guys should have to do.
Yeah, I don't know much about China, but when I see people like John Bolton meeting with Hong Kong separatist leaders, and I see some of the propaganda that where now Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump are now the self-appointed guardians of human rights in China. It just, on the face of it, it's ridiculous. I don't know if you saw that video that came out recently of a bunch of kids in China circling and all dribbling a basketball.
Yeah.
So I thought that was beautiful. I thought that was a nice display of cooperation and concentration. And yet, I don't know if you saw the reaction, but it's like people were freaking out as if this was somehow some kind of propaganda exercise for young Chinese kids.
Wow. Yeah. No, if you've ever been to China, you'll see that in the morning. You'll see large numbers of people doing group exercises in parks and doing different types of things like that. That was at a school. And like I said, basketball is something that, the young Chinese athletes, they love basketball. They play basketball, and it's a part of their learning. And it was, I've seen other videos, but yeah, that was a nice video because it's actually something I want to try with a group of kids I work over here, to see how difficult it actually is to do that, because they were in sync, they were working together, and you get the idea, right? It's about cooperation and everyone being on the same page and everyone being focused on the same goal. And, I guess that is a symbol for sort of what, Chinese society is.
And it just shows how backward the elite culture of our society is, that we look at a bunch of kids and feel contempt towards that. And look, it's crazy. Let me ask you a basketball question. As a power forward, you came in, by the way, in the greatest NBA draft class of all time: LeBron, Melo, D Wade, Chris Bosh. In recent years, there's been this shift towards small ball. Your team, the Golden State Warriors, was a part of that. But now you have the Lakers with a pretty big team. Anthony Davis, LeBron, obviously, JaMale McGee, Dwight Howard. I think they're like one of their smallest players is Danny Green, who's like, I don't know. He's pretty.
He's huge.
Tough,
Danny
yeah.
big, yeah. Danny big as hell, right?
So how do you feel seeing like a team of big men doing so well?
Well, the small ball thing is, a reaction, is really a reaction ultimately to Steph Curry. And I've been trying to explain people this, like, Don Nelson played small ball a little bit. But what he was trying to do was he was trying to just figure out a way to attack sort of the traditional basketball environment. But I wouldn't say that Nelly, even when he experimented with it, was, did it in a way that forced the rest of the league to change. So the unique thing about what Steph has done is Steph has weaponized the 3-point shot. He and Clay both have weaponized the three to a degree beyond analytics, right? Because they were shooting threes before the whole analytics thing came in. These two guys perfected the art of shooting and, the timing of shooting and what the idea of what a good shot is, what a 3-point, Steph with the range, right? You see all the guys shooting long threes now. Clay, sprinting, shooting threes. It basically shifted because you can't defend those two guys specifically with traditional big guys who don't want to leave the paint. And so once they're not playing, now you can go back to traditional basketball because simply other teams that play small don't carry the threat that Steph and Clay are, right? So you can play small. Teams do play small and play smaller lineups, but it's not as effective, meaning, world championship level, dynasty level effective because of the ability of those guys to shoot the ball. And so small ball is kind of tricky. The Lakers, literally, because you didn't have to account for Steph and Clay this year, there's no need to play small. You can go back to traditional lineups. The Lakers play, the lineups that they play when they've got, Kuzma and Danny Green, LeBron, JaVale, and AD. The smallest guy on the floor is Danny, 6'6", 230 pounds. They're huge. And that's what I've always felt like, particularly with them coming down the stretch, is that their size is just going to be too much. When you've got Anthony Davis, JaVale, then you bring Dwight Howard off the bench. Again, you bring Kuzma off the bench. You're bringing size off the bench. It just makes the proposition of challenging them that much more difficult. But small ball itself, again, I look at it from the perspective of it was really weaponized because of Steph and Clay's ability to shoot the ball, and defense is just being, resigning to the fact that the only way you can deal with these guys is to have similar size out there who can deal with their speed, their constant up and down pace, and their ability to push the ball in such a way that forces bigger, slower guys off the floor.
You mentioned analytics, which I had forgotten about. That was a big fad for a while. Is that legit, or was that just kind of one of these like front office fads?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the analytics thing it's at a point now, but it had gotten to a point where you can use analytics like a hammer, like a tool, right, in a toolbox. So you got this toolbox, and analytics is one of your tools. It's a screwdriver, it's the drill, but it cannot be the basis by which you build the home. Like, you can't just say, I'm going to build a home and I'm only going to use this tool to build this home. That's when, I think the line gets crossed and you get caught in a situation like the Houston Rockets were in a few years ago, where you're such an analytically based team that when it was time for you to make a basketball adjustment that I felt like would have taken them, beyond the Warriors. They lost to the Warriors when Kevin Durant went down, but because the Rockets weren't in a position to post up, and they didn't have a post player, they didn't have a guy they could throw the ball into in the post, they couldn't adjust the way that they played. So, you lose, the Warriors lose KD, and they can't adjust. They've had other moments, and there are other teams that do it as well. But when you try to use analytics as the only tool by which you sort of build this house, it's just not going to work. And then ultimately the whole analytics wave is anti-Jordan, and that's probably, when I realized that, is where that was the point where I just decided to say, well, it's a bunch of garbage, because analytics is against post-ups, particularly, mid-post post-ups and mid-range jumpers.
How can you be against mid-range jumpers? That's crazy. That's, yeah.
Right. And in essence, that's everything that Michael Jordan was. So for you to have a basketball philosophy that basically, in my mind, is anti-Jordan, just doesn't make sense. I mean, it just doesn't make sense because in essence, basing analytics at the base of your basketball logic, Michael Jordan shouldn't have been able to do what he did.
Yeah, and I think
Right?
of all the elite players, Kawhi, Kobe, everyone's got a great mid
Yeah.
range.
Exactly. So that's why I said it's a tool in the toolbox. You can use it to analyze, stats and games after the fact. But as far as using it to literally determine and build teams and select players, like, well, we're going to select this guy because he can, shoot corner threes, and then you ignore the fact that he can't move his feet on defense, can't jump, doesn't have good sense of backside help and all of the different detail pieces that you need to be successful at the pro level. You end up having guys who are one-trick ponies. Like literally, you have a guy on your team that can do one or two things, as opposed to having fundamentally sound guys up and down your roster, which Golden State, I thought, tricked a lot of people in terms of how they approached the game, because people thought that the Warriors were an analytics-based team, and that's just not what they are. They take the best shot available. If you give Steph 20 layups in a game, he's going to take 20 layups. If you give him 20 elbow mid-range jumpers, he's going to take those. But if you also decide that you're not going to guard him 3 or 4 feet behind the three-point line, he's going to take those first, right? Same thing with Clay. He's going to take what you give him. He can score at all 3 levels. And he's not necessarily just shooting threes. If you get up on the three-point line and force Clay to drive and give him layups all night, he's going to drive and get layups all night. So I think people have that part of them confused because they're not looking at analytics and saying, Steph, you got to shoot this amount of shots, or you got to, shoot from this spot on the floor only. I work with some high school kids, and I had a high school kid tell me this summer that his coach literally didn't let him shoot anything other than layups or threes. But his coach is looking at analytics layout and saying that the highest percentage shot, right, that you have a better ratio of scoring more points if you shoot threes, and then obviously getting shots at the rim, but completely disregarding the space in between. So again, the game is what it is. The game is always going to dictate how it is to be played, and what I mean by that is, right, bigger, stronger, faster players. The guys who are more skilled, the guys who have a greater grasp of the game from top to bottom on both sides of the floor, ultimately are going to rise to the top. And if you're not a complete player, if you're just a one-trick pony, if you're just an analytics style player, eventually you're gonna run out of places to climb, because you're going to hit a ceiling.
You played during a golden era of power forwards, KG, Dirk,
Mm-hmm.
Tim Duncan. I mean, this could go on forever. How did you prepare for all that? How did you prepare for going up against these guys? And when did you realize that you actually were an all-star?
Yeah, it took some time. Because I'm somebody, and I've always told people this, like, I got my confidence through basketball. Like, I wasn't a very confident kid. One, because I grew late. My height came late, but everything else came early. So I had big ass hands. I was wearing I wear a size 18 now, but before I was even 6'2", 6'1", or 6'2", I was in a 17. I was in a size 16 in like the 7th or 8th grade. And so I always had a big foot, and so clothes fit differently, and I was super awkward with long arms, but I wasn't, taller than 6 feet. And then when I grew, and it all sort of fit together, I got my confidence. And, basketball has always been a place where I've been the most confident. On the court is where I was the most confident in my life. So when you go into the NBA and then you realize, like, the guys that you looked up to, I'm a huge Tim Duncan fan. He's like one of my favorite players. Him and David Robinson were like my favorite players growing up. I had posters of KG on my wall, and when you see these guys up close and personal for a second, you're wondering whether or not you can match up. And then it wasn't until my 3rd year in the league where I finally got a chance. I got the starting job, and I had a coach tell me, he said, look, man, you go out and you play the game the right way. He said, but you got to start challenging these guys that you're matching up against on the stat sheet. He said, so, you're playing against, Dirk Nowitzki and Tim Duncan and Sharif Abdul-Rahim and Elton Brand and Zach Randolph and whoever. I mean, KG. There was a lot of guys in there at the time. He said, you need to match them on the stat sheet. You need to, win matchups. And I had never thought about that. I had never looked at the game that way. Like, I got to win my statistical matchup against the guy that I'm lined up against. So then, I'm looking at him as a third-year player, still fairly young, and I'm saying, man, you want me to try to match against Dirk Nowitzki? You want me to try to match against, these guys who are averaging 20, 25, 30 points a game or whatever it is? But I needed that shot of confidence, because it was at that point that I, started taking more pride in myself in terms of I got to challenge these guys. And yeah, they're more gifted than I am physically. They can do things that I can't do, but I can give the effort. I could have an impact on a game that would allow me to win, even if I couldn't match you statistically, point for point or shot for shot, rebound for rebound. I found ways to be effective, but then also when the games were on the line, to make sure that my team came out on top. So that was the way I approached the whole time I was in the league, but particularly early on when I had to figure out a way how to match these guys, how to get to where they were in terms of their ability to score and carry their teams, but then also they're unbelievable talents. And one thing I didn't do, and I never do, is I don't lie to myself. So I never got to this point in my life where I was trying to convince myself that I was of their caliber. Right? I never tried to convince myself, yeah, man, you the same as KG or you're on the same level as Dirk. No, these guys are all-time greats. I mean, these guys are legends. These guys are some of the best players to ever play the game. And me having a mindset like that, I thought was more detrimental than me being realistic about who I was, knowing my limitations as an athlete, but then literally trying to max out. So that meant getting stronger. That meant developing a mid-range jumper. That meant figuring out, just overdosing people with pick and pops and pick and rolls and then post ups and, using my hands on defense, using my voice on defense, all the different things that I had to do and I had to focus on to make sure that I was effective on the floor. But, it was a journey in terms of settling myself down to a point where I could say, okay, you can go out here and compete against these guys on a night in, night out basis, regardless of, who they are. There's a standard that you set for yourself and you hold yourself to that standard regardless of who's matched up against you.
David West, the Professional Collegiate League, it's launching next year.
Yep, 2021 this summer.
All right. Well, look, I really appreciate your time, David. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Aaron.